There are more than 20 candidates fighting for the Democratic nomination, but only one clear frontrunner. Joe Biden is polling 38% of registered Democrats in a Morning Consult poll out this week, nearly double the support of his closest rival, Bernie Sanders. 70% of Democrats in the latest NBC Wall Street Journal's poll say they are enthusiastic or comfortable with Biden. But do these numbers matter 8 months before the first votes are cast? At this point, 4 years ago, Jeb Bush was the Republican heir apparent, and we know how that ended. 8 years ago, Hillary Clinton held a similarly commanding lead over a freshman senator from Illinois named Barack Obama. In fact, we looked through 20 years' worth of polling data to see who was leading in June, the year before the election, in contested primaries. Only 4 of them became the nominee, and just 1 became President George W. Bush. So what do we make of Biden's early lead? Let's ask 2 experts. Joel Benison, a pollster for Obama and Clinton campaigns, now an advisor to the Pete Buttigieg campaign, and John Della Volpe, director of polling at Harvard Kennedy School. Just a few other greatest hits, guys. Ed Muskie, 32% to George McGovern, 4% in 72. Jimmy Carter was at 0.8% to George Wallace's 19%. Mario Cuomo, 20% to Bill Clinton at 1.3%. And it's just interesting. And interestingly enough, Scott Walker was at 16.5%. A guy named Donald Trump was 3%.
And you left out Rudy Giuliani, who was leading with 29.
Yeah, our good friend Rudy. Yeah. So, John, is there anything in this history, or is it in such a different world now because the amount of both exposure and candidates?
I think a couple of things. First of which, we look at movements, right? And when you look at the Morning Consult poll as an example, only 2 of the candidates have actually improved their lead and improved their numbers since January. So that's important. One of which is Biden, the other of which is your client, Pete Buttigieg, those 2. So that's one thing that we look at. The other thing we look at is I look at the last cycle, and I think Trump led in 77% of the polls and about 99% of them once he got in, by early to mid-July. And obviously Hillary was leading in 99% of them. So there is significant, I think, an insight from having this lead if you were able to expand it, but it's still a long way away. It's Biden's to lose, and we could well lose it.
Joe, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, to build off that point, something we have to think about here is these campaigns have gotten significantly longer over time. When we started in 2007, in January of 2007, that was incredibly early. You mentioned Mario Cuomo. He announced on December 16th, 1991, that he wasn't going to file papers in New Hampshire. The primaries were starting in March. It was a much shorter campaign. So the longer out from the actual voters being heard at the polls, the more erratic and the polls can be.
Joel, you're just starting to work with Buttigieg. Are you seeing any numbers in the crosstabs that show a Biden vulnerability in terms of trending or certain characteristics that make him very vulnerable?
Well, if I was seeing anything, I wouldn't talk about it here, Donnie. No. Look, we've just come on board there pretty recently. I think the thing for Joe Biden right now is he's got to know that he's got a name ID advantage that is working to his favor. He was vice president for 8 years. He knows that's the case, and I think they're running a campaign accordingly. The question is, for any candidate, how long does that name ID sustain you when others become as known as you are?
John, the one thing he's got big in his favor is he can beat Trump. And that's a perception. And to me, that is the driver beyond anything. And right now, there's an idealized version of Biden. They've kept him very kind of back, which is smart. What would you see right now? What would you be looking for in Biden if you were looking at numbers to see the chinks in the armor?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, let's understand why he's leading, why he's in the position he's in, because I think it's more than just name ID. He's leading, I think, because the Democratic electorate may not be as progressive as we think it is, right? It may not be as far left as we think it is. We did a poll recently, and we found that self-identified Democrats who are likely to vote in the primary are more center-left than far-left, and certainly more center-left than Republicans are forever. So that is very kind of comfortable terrain for him. Using branding, he's a Ford 150, right? We know who he is, and he's modernized a little bit, right? And we'll see to the extent to which he can appeal to a cross-section of voters. He is very strong among folks in their 50s and 60s. He's up by 30 or so. What I think is going to be important is he's currently second among younger voters. But as a lot of people indicate, there could be as many people who are part of the Gen Z and millennial generation participate in this primary as older people. So that would be something that we really need to take a close look at to see if that could be some vulnerability. Currently, he's in a solid second place there. Again, I think a lot of that is with name ID and the halo effect from 8 years in the White House.
I think there's another thing at stake here, Joel, and I don't know if the polls show this, is when I used to do advertising, we would do a very racy campaign for a car company. It was outrageous, whatnot. afterwards the client will want to go back to some, let's show running car footage, really safe. And I think that what would have traditionally worked against Biden, he's been there, he's not sexy, the comfort food, the kind of safety of Biden works against the current incumbent.
Well, I think there is an element of that that's true, but the other thing that's true in my experience in presidential campaigns is people want to fall in love.
Yeah.
They really want to get excited about the candidate they're with. And I'm not saying that that's not true of Joe Biden for his supporters, but if you look at some of the polls you cited, they changed in 2008 when Barack Obama won in Iowa, won in South Carolina. And that's the first time in February of 2008 when he took a lead in a national poll. So I think the voters are going to be excited about a lot of these people. They like a lot of these people. We don't have a lot of controversy on our side. So I think you're going to be road tested over time here. And this thing is going to change.
Well, it certainly will change in a few weeks with the debates. I'm curious, as pollsters, if you were both either talking to Biden or if you were talking to one of the underdogs, what would be the key thing, both on the research, based on the research you've seen, you'd be saying to each one of them to accomplish in the debate? John, start with you.
I would be not to think too much. I think too many elected officials, too many candidates, too many consultants try to put too many thoughts in people's head. And what works for, I think, Pete Buttigieg, what's working for Biden is they're being true to themselves. They're speaking from kind of their background, and their authenticity is just, to me, very, very obvious. In particular, what Biden needs to do is he needs to talk more about the future, right? He's kind of clear in terms of he can kind of restore, in his view, kind of restore America domestically as well as internationally. Can he talk about the future? He started that perhaps with his education policy being out of the gate first.
Joe, I think your boy, the fact that he's a vet is huge. Would you be pushing for him to talk about that on stage?
Look, I think it's important. I think it's a credential that people will value. My mantra about presidential campaigns and debates in particular is you got to talk about their lives, not your life. Yeah, your background matters here, but ultimately you've got to make that connection with voters. No matter who you are, it's got to be about the things that are their most pressing concerns, and you've got to demonstrate that you've got the remedy for that. And I think, that's why you're seeing many candidates do pretty well right now. You've got about 5 who are sucking up about 80% of the totals in the polls.
Well, guys, this is a great segment. I want you guys back, all right? Thanks for coming here.
Happy to do it.
John, where'd you go? You scrolled away. I'm saying goodbye to these guys, right? Joe Benison and John Della Volpe, thank you so much for joining us. Up next on Sunday Night Politics, my hero and zeros of the week. Plus, we all know them. Maybe it's a family member or a co-worker. I'm talking about Trump supporters. Up next, I'll share some advice on how to have a constructive conversation with them and why you need to do it before the 2020 election.